Session. That's good to go. Yeah, hello everyone. Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Africa Share and Discuss webinar series. It's always a pleasure to have you join us, and we look forward to having an engaging and insightful conversation today. While we wait for everyone to settle in and before we, of course, take our housekeeping protocol and then introduce our speaker, I invite you to please just would love to know you. Drop your name as always in the chat where you're connecting from. And something interesting about you, it could be a subject you teach, anything you think we should know about you. I will share my screen and we will be on our way. Just wondering. So great. Welcome to the November edition of the Share and Discuss webinar series. And today we have an interesting topic before us: students and motivation, and how we can enhance student motivation when it comes to learning physics with PhET sims. We have an exciting speaker who will be sharing about his research in a bit. But just before we introduce our speaker for today, we'll just take some housekeeping rules and we'll be on our way. So as always, the webinar is brought to you from the PhET Interactive Simulation Project at the University of Colorado Boulder that creates free interactive science and math simulation. The sims are based on extensive math and science education, extensive education research, and engage students through intuitive and game-like environments where students learn through exploration and discovery. The project was founded in 2002 by Nobel laureate Carl Wyman. The goal at FET is to improve the quality and access to quality math and science education. And in line with our goal, this is one of the many expressions where we bring in seasoned researchers on the continent to share the insights and recommendation they found from, of course, carrying out research on the effectiveness or whatever question they want to answer around PhET, but also practitioners in the industry who have extensive experience using PhET come around and share their experience. But the overall goal is that the insights we get from here, we can return to the classroom or to our lesson tomorrow ready to implement them. So we distill those technical details so that they are practicable and applicable in our context. The session holds every third Wednesday of the month. I would like to add at this point that the next edition, being December, will be an exception. So we're going to come up just a week earlier. So next month being the final month of the year, December, we're going to be meeting in the second week. But traditionally, we meet every third Wednesday of the month, and this is the breakdown according to the part of the continent that you're located. And this session is recorded, so you can catch up on this edition. You can share with your friends, even past recordings from inception. If there's anything you've missed, you can always catch up. So I invite you to visit PhET Interactive Sims on Facebook, on YouTube, and you can find the playlist. Also, it's important to know that while the presentation is ongoing, we will not be able to take questions. So we encourage and advise that you please take note of all the questions that come to mind while the speaker is presenting. But we've saved ample time towards the end to address all the questions you might have. So please use the question and answer feature here in Zoom to drop your questions, and you can be sure that we'll get to it right after the presentation. And finally, there's a community on Facebook that we invite you to join if you're not part of it. It's a community of PhET users on the continent, and you have a mixed audience of both speakers, super users of PhET, as well as PhET fellows, where people ask questions, get support, and also stay up to date of news and activities around PhET in Africa. So please consider joining if you're not part of it. And without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for today, none other than Patrick Agyei. Patrick is a science educator from the Methodist College of Education in Ghana. He's a practicing teacher. So he used to be in the high school, but now has moved to the College of Education, where he continues to champion science education there in Ghana. And today he's going to be sharing his findings from his research conducted on how to enhance student motivation when it comes to learning physics. We're so excited to have you, Patrick. I'll hand the mic over to you now.
Thank you, Shola, for the opportunity given me to also share our research findings with the PhET educator community for Africa.
Hi, Patrick. Can I jump in there if you don't mind?
Yes.
I know your video is on at inception. Are you aware it's off now?
Yes, I think it's.
We love to see your face. Thank you.
All right. All right. So thanks for the opportunity given for me to also share research findings with the PhET educator community for Africa. Good day, everyone. My name is Patrick. As Shola rightfully said, a physics educator in Ghana. And this afternoon, we'll be looking at how we have used the PhET interactive simulation to enhance students' motivation to learn physics, and specifically in electricity concepts. All right, hello. I hope my slides are showing.
Yes, your slides are up and they're now full screen. Thank you.
All right. So we are looking at the topic enhancing students' motivation to learn physics using the interactive PhET simulation. When you come to Ghana, so this is going to be an outline of the presentation. We look at the introduction, the motivation to the recommendation. Now, when you come to Ghana, one of the objectives that we have in the senior high school physics program happens to encourage and maintain students' enthusiasm in physics as a practical tool for societal change. And you know, for such an objective to be achieved, what it means is that physics concepts must be taught in ways that are able to sustain and maintain their students' interest. But studies have also shown that when we make use of relevant instructional resources to support the teaching and learning process, it has that impact to improve students' performance and also maintain their interest in learning the concepts that are being taught. And so we look at the concept of motivation. And to one authority, motivation is a process whereby a goal-directed activity is instigated as well as being sustained. So what this means is that for a learner to try and accomplish a specific task, for a learner to be successful on an activity, the learner needs that desire, and that desire can be provided by motivation. And so motivation will serve as the basis for gaining understanding of scientific concepts because of its significance in improving students' concept formation. And so without it, without motivation, what our learners are going to do is going to be basically learning science concepts by rote memorization. And with rote memorization, chances are high that they are not going to understand the concept. They may only chew the concepts, write their exams, and after they are done with their exams, that ends the whole show. Now, with the theoretical underpinning for this study, we made use of the engagement theory. And this is one of the theories that supports technology-based teaching. And the underlying principle of this theory is that students must be meaningfully engaged in learning activities through interaction with others as well as worthwhile activities. And the proponents are of the view that this meaningful engagement can be facilitated when we use technology as a teaching resource. And again, to the proponents, there are three major components or parts that when educators put together, it is able to enhance meaningful learning by students. And these components are the relate component, the create component, as well as the donate. So in the relate component, we talk about learners learning in teams or working in groups. So you put your learners in groups, they share ideas among themselves to solve problems. The second component, which is the create component, talks about making learners know the real life application of the concepts that are being taught, because this is going to increase your learners' curiosity and also develop their creative ideas. And the donate component talks about the learner's active participation in the teaching learning process. And so when these three components comes together, it has that potential to bring about meaningful learning by our students. Now, the aim of the study was to find out the effects of the physics education technology simulation, that is PhET, instruction on students' motivation to learn physics concepts, specifically electricity. And we chose electricity because it happens to be one of the concepts that studies have shown that those concepts are normally taught in abstraction. And so we are trying to find out, when we use the PhET to teach these concepts, how is the motivation levels of our learners going to rise or improve? And we made use of the questionnaire on students' motivation towards science learning. This was used to assess the learner's motivation to learn electricity concepts in two different classroom scenarios. Now, the two classroom scenarios we made use of were the demonstrative classroom and the exploratory classroom. In Ghana, we have classification for our schools. We have the endowed schools and the less endowed schools. With the endowed schools, they have adequate resources, but the less endowed normally have deficits in terms of the resources. And so within the demonstrative classroom, all that the teacher requires to use is a computer or a laptop and a projector to project the particular sim, PhET sim, that he or she may want to use. With the exploratory classroom situation, we have the PhET sims installed on the computers in the computer laboratory, and learners have the opportunity to explore the PhET sims. In the demonstrative classroom, the learners are called intermittently to also do a little kind of exploration. The research methods that was being employed was the explanatory sequential mixed methods, and our participants for this study were first-year senior high school science students from two senior high schools in the South Dye district in the Volta region. First-year students were used in the sense that they have just joined the senior high school from the junior high. And so although they may have some background knowledge from junior high, at the senior high school level, they have not been introduced to this concept. And for purposes of anonymity, the schools were identified as schools A and B, with school A having 32 participants and school B having 31. And in school A is where we have our demonstrative classroom, and school B is where we had our exploratory classroom. Our data collection instrument consisted of semi-structured interview, as well as the questionnaire from the students' motivation towards science learning, SMTSL. We adapted the test items developed by Tuan et al. 2005. And the questionnaire has 35 items with 6 sub-skills on a 4-point Likert scale in our study. And to the developers of the test items, these sub-skills come together to give an idea of the motivational levels of learners in a classroom situation. And so the sub-skills, we have the self-efficacy, active learning strategies, science learning value, performance goal, achievement goal, as well as the learning environment stimulation. And so when we talk about the self-efficacy, we are basically looking at the learner's perception on their own capabilities to do well. So when the learner has that belief in his or her own capacities, that I can do well on a particular concept that are being taught. Active learning strategies talk about the participatory position of the learner, where learners become active participants and they will have to apply the concept that are being taught to solve problems. With science learning value, here talks about the invaluable impact. So we make learners aware of the impact of science in daily life. Learners are being exposed to the real life application of the concepts that are being taught. Now with performance goal talks about the learner's rationale for taking part in class activities. And here we are looking at, are learners taking part in the class activities basically because they want to obtain higher marks, maybe on a test? Is it that they are doing it so that they can show to their colleagues or their teachers that academically they are good? So we look at the learner's rationale for partaking in an activity. Achievement goal talks about the learner's inherent characteristic to feel happy and fulfilled after the learner has been able to solve a problem. And the learning environment stimulation talks about the use of activities or resources like the interactive PhET simulation, which is capable of sustaining the learner's interest in the subject. Now, we gave the SMTSL questionnaire as a pretest and also as a post-test. So before the learners were taken through the electricity concepts, we have to gauge their motivational levels first. Then after the intervention, which lasted for a period of 4 weeks, which is 1 month, we also again measured their motivational levels to find out whether indeed using the PhET simulation has really brought about an improvement in their motivational levels. Now with the results and discussion, we had our test items on a 4-point Likert scale, and the meanings given to the various mean scores are such that when we have a mean score from 1.00 to 1.99, then it means that the learner has a lower motivation. When it is between 2.00 to 2.99, that represents a moderate motivation. And between 3.00 to 3.99 represents a high motivation. Now with our results. Now in this table, we try to find out the mean score of students on the various constructs of the motivation scale that we use before the intervention and after the intervention. Now, when you observe from the table, we could see that school A, which had the activity through demonstrations, recorded an overall mean of 2.67, and group B, which had it through the exploratory situation, had an overall mean score of 2.52 before the intervention, which means that per our interpretation, the learners have a moderate motivation before the intervention. Now, going through the individual subscales for school A, you could observe that performance goal, which talks about the learner's rationale for taking part in an activity, recorded the highest mean score of 2.87 before the intervention. But for school B, self-efficacy, which talks about the learner's belief in his or her own capabilities, followed by performance goal. So we could see that performance goal plays a critical role when it comes to learners' motivation, their rationale for taking part in a class activity. Now, after the intervention for the two schools, what we observed for the two schools was that learning environment stimulation, which talks about making use of resources that has the potential to sustain students' interest in the subject, recorded the highest mean score for the two schools. That is 3.55 for school A and 3.83 for school B. They, however, had a mean score of 3.26 and 3.29 respectively for schools A and B, which means that after the intervention, the learner's motivational level moved from moderate to a higher motivation. And so we move a step ahead to find out whether indeed the mean scores we are seeing for the post-test and the pre-test, indeed whether there is a difference between the two. And so we ran a PhET sample t-test for the two schools. And what we observed was that at a significance level of 95%, we had a p-value of 0.00, which means that there was a significant difference between the pre-test scores and post-test scores, meaning that indeed there has been improvement in students' motivational levels. And again, we look at to what extent has there been an increase in the motivational levels of these students. And so we run the effect size, which is the eta squared. And for school A, that had the activity through demonstrations, recorded an eta or effect size of 0.77, and school B had 0.933, which means that the use of the PhET simulation increased the motivational levels of students in school A by 77.7%, and that of school B by 93.3%. And the difference in the interval or on the effect size could be attributed to the fact that those in school B had the opportunity to explore the PhET sims themselves. In school A, it was done by the teacher, and the learners are also called intermittently to do part of the activity. Now, again, we wanted to find out which of the classroom situations had the most effect, whether there was a difference between the two classroom situations, so that if there is no difference between the two classroom situations being used, then the conclusion we can draw is that whether the teacher or in a school, whether there is an access to a computer laboratory or not, the teacher can make use of the interactive PhET simulation to teach concepts because it has the potential to improve learners' motivation. So we ran an independent sample t-test at a significance level of 95%, and we had a p-value of 0.051, which means that statistically no significant difference existed between the scores, the post-test scores of school A and school B. So what this means is that teachers can make use, or stakeholders of education can make use of the interactive PhET simulation, either in an exploratory classroom or in a demonstrative classroom. And so what are the rationale for students? The rationale for students giving us a drop. Why did we have a drop in the motivational level on the skill performance goal for the two schools? Because we observed that before the intervention, students recorded a high mean score on performance goal. Even though it was second for school B, it was first for school A. And we saw that the mean scores for A and B were almost the same. So we went a step further to find out from the learners, what then actually is your rationale for taking part in this study that we did? And these are sample responses. And so one student mentioned that I participated in the lesson because this was the first time I have seen physics being taught in a computer laboratory or doing physics on a computer. I always think the computers are meant for ICT lessons. Now, to another student, I was very happy we were learning physics with a projector and also how I could just visualize circuit symbols. I don't think I will forget these symbols because you click on the component and it changes to a symbol, and a click brings it back to the original component. So you could see from the first respondent and the third respondent that to the first respondent, he is of the view that anytime they go to the ICT lab, then it is going to be for ICT lessons. And so teaching physics in the ICT laboratory was a very good thing that he or she has encountered. And this second person is also of the view that when he sees these things, he don't think he's going to forget. So it is good that as teachers, we make use of the interactive PhET simulation in teaching concepts in physics and the sciences in general. Now, another student was also of the view that we have always been told when resistors are in parallel, the current is shared among them. And I've been thinking about how it is shared. But from this lesson, I saw with my own eyes how the moving current divided when it got to the junction. I was more curious about seeing this because I know when I understand, I can do well in class. And so for this learner, it's just giving us an idea about the abstract nature of teaching these concepts, even from the basic school. And for the first time, he's being able to see how these things are happening. And another student also mentioned that the lesson was very interesting and I really enjoyed it. I wish we always learn with these two. And one student also mentioned, I really enjoyed the lesson because I was able to create my own circuits. To me, I would like that we have more lessons with the FET. So all these responses from the participants suggest that there was, in fact, a change in even the learner's rationale for taking part in the study, not just to obtain higher scores, not just to, for the colleagues or the peers to see that he is a good student, but it really motivated them to explore further. Now, what are the recommendations for practice? Based on our findings, we are recommending that as stakeholders in education, we should include the PhET simulation in the physics curriculum. As teachers, whenever we are planning our lessons, we can include the PhET simulation as one of our instructional resources for teaching concepts like electricity, because it had the potential to increase students' motivation towards learning. Then again, we also mentioned that the government and other stakeholders must make efforts to provide projectors to schools so that physics teachers who want to teach electricity concepts can make use of the interactive PhET simulation in a demonstrative manner to teach, because our findings revealed that even in the demonstrative classroom, the simulation was able to bring about 77.7% improvement in students' motivation. And finally, schools where there are computer laboratories, it is recommended that the PhET sims are installed on the computers to enable teachers teach such concepts in the computer laboratory. Thank you very much for your audience, and this brings us to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That was quite insightful and a lot to unpack actually from the presentation. I see some questions are dropping in. So please, if you have questions, this is the best time to drop it in the chat, or preferably just use the question and answer feature. Before I get to some thoughts, I can see feedbacks from people. Kaluta is saying, wonderful presentation. Abdullah says, like, nice presentation, would like the slides. Tilahu, apologies if I pronounced that wrong, also saying nice presentation, thank you. It's all of that are coming through. So thank you for such an insightful presentation. A lot bubbles up, a lot comes to mind, but I'm sure we'll get to that. We'll read through the questions and I'll also add some things. But just in a nutshell, some of the things that was actually pleasant to see were the remarks and feedback from the students, because it beyond the numbers, of course, that researchers would see, it actually just pierces through. Like beyond the quantitative feedback, the qualitative feedback from the students actually shed a lot of light into the process and the effect this exposure to PhET, but most importantly, the research you carried out did. But one thing stood out also in particular for me was something along the lines of the students shift in focus from just attaining a particular grade or just acing their exam to actually understanding and retaining a lot of the things that they were learned, so being actively involved. And it was great to see, just before I start reading the questions, that while, so you did mention two dimensions. There's the exposure as a demonstration tool, and then the active engagement of students where they're carrying out themselves. So both of them have gains, but also definitely getting students involved actively would, of course, work is it was a lot more efficient than demonstration. So, but what I like is the presentation of your research actually caters to all of the possible scenarios or context in classroom. So in places where it's just a projector that's available for use, massive opportunity, that's still a big gain. and push towards retention and long-term gain achievement and learning outcome from the student. And if they have personal computers or well-equipped lab, of course, we can even push those gains further. So thank you for such, of course, for that research and carrying out and sharing the findings and recommendations with us. I'll go to the questions now. I see Anonymous is asking, can we get the soft copy of the slide? I'll allow our speaker speak for himself. Alfred is asking, nice presentation. Please provide insights on the technological skill of teachers and students. That's a good question. So how did you choose students? What's their digital literacy level like? Did that have an impact at any point?
Yes, the researchers for the teaching, it was done by the physics teachers. With our students, we took them through a little training on how the PhET SIMs are being used. So we took them to the computer laboratory after the installation, and we guided them through to explore. And because they were also in groups, at least we find that in every group, there was that one student who was a bit proficient in the use of technology and so could share what he or she knows with their colleagues. Yeah, so when they work in groups, it's very useful to help them, get the concepts very well and also how to use the technology that is available to them.
Awesome, thank you. And that's also one of the components from the engagement theory that you use them in your research in terms of active working in
Yes.
group. But also what we know and strongly recommend at PhET, also this is just speaking broadly as well, is what we call open play. So we know students are curious. So before a lesson, we always advise you allow for a few minutes just for them to explore without guidance. So they can try out, they can see how the components on screen work, they can know what to drag and drop. And of course, there's a lot of insights that you can gain from that. That also addresses their curiosity. They're not trying to figure out how this works while your session is on. So it's more meeting that curiosity, also helping them get comfortable with that environment. And I think, of course, I'm glad that question was asked. And I'm sure that was what that helped. But what I want to emphasize quickly before I get to the next one is it was not a carefully selected group of students who were proficient. It's a mixed group of students who just had some
Exactly.
exposure prior to that. Yeah, so that applies to all of our traditional classrooms. And there's a similar question as well from Kaluta. Did computer literacy play any effect for particular pupils, participants? If any, how did you resolve it? I think you answered that, but would you like to say anything to that? Or did you see any challenge?
I think in addition to the students working in groups, we also provided them with activity sheets. And the activity sheets has screenshots of the various parts on the PhET SIM where they are to click at every point in time. And permit me to share a sample activity sheet, how it looks
Sure.
like. Yeah.
Sure, go for it. So while you are bringing that up, I'll just read. Once it's up, I'll stop. I'll read some
All
of the
right.
feedback.
So this is a sample activity sheet, which we had two objectives for it. Helping the learners to identify basic circuit symbols and also create circuits for themselves. So you could see that on the activity, set your simulation environment as you are seeing in the picture. So once they open, the various parts has been captured and labeled. And so at every point in time, if they are encountering any challenge, they get to know where they are to click to get the feature that they are looking for. Yeah.
Awesome. So they were guided without, they were given guardrails, but they had enough room to explore and then
Exactly.
discover for themselves. So for learning as well, it's important there's some form of guidance so that they don't go too far from the objective for the lesson, especially when we have time constraints. As teachers, that's usually one very key component
That's very true.
of our classroom or session. Martin says, in very insightful presentation, the student feedback was good and informative. Fabot is asking, what parameters did you use in selecting the schools, students, grade level, and nature of institution, whether public or private? You spoke to that earlier on. I'm not sure if you missed that, but yeah, can you speak a
All
bit to
right.
that?
So we had a district, which is the Saudi district, which had 4 senior high schools, which are all public. So all the schools used were public. Then of these schools, 2 of them has access to well-finished computer laboratories, and 2 of the schools do not have computer laboratories. So randomly, we selected one with access to computer laboratory and one without access to computer laboratory. Now, when we get to the schools, we also saw that those in year 2 have already done these concepts. And so we felt using the second years will not help us to get to know the effect of the PhET. And so we selected first years who have not been exposed to the concept at the senior high school level, although they have a background knowledge coming from the basic school. And we made use of the already existing classes. We did not create our own classes. So in every school, we find out the number of science classes and we randomly select any one of them. So we did not just handpick some category of students to form our groups. We made use of the natural classroom situations that we have in our schools.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I hope that answers your question, Cabot. Abdullah is saying, I think this is a kind of broader question, but you might just want to speak to that. Is asking, please, in the case of interview section, can one use Google Form to access the respondent's idea and respond for the research?
We did not make use of the Google Forms because at the senior high school level, students are not allowed to use a mobile phone. And so we didn't make use of Google Forms. We met the respondents face to face to ask them so that as they give their responses, we have the chance to also probe further. Using the Google Forms may limit you in a way. There are students who may not be okay when it comes to writing, but when you ask them to share their views with you, they can give a whole lot of insightful information.
Great, thank you. Still questions coming through. Please keep them coming. Elijah says, don't you realize that quasi-experimental approach would be perfect for this case so that you can measure the extent the control was improved? I don't know, any thoughts to that? Did you consider other research method or approach, or how did you arrive at your choice?
Yes, we will say that this is a quasi-experimental in the sense that we made use of the already existing classroom situations. In our case, we set the demonstrative classroom to be a control. When you look at past studies, most of the studies will be comparing the PhET to the traditional classroom. And I will say that once you are comparing the PhET to the traditional classroom, even without getting your findings, you are likely to tell us the outcome of your study, that those who had it using the PhET are going to perform well than those who had it in the traditional. And so the demonstrative classroom was more or less the control, so that at the end of the day, if even in the demonstration or demonstrative classroom, learners' motivational levels improve, then it also gives us an idea that I do not need only a computer laboratory to teach these concepts in the various schools, which kind of school that you will find yourself. I don't know if
Great,
the question has
thank you.
been answered.
Yes, I believe so. If Elijah has additional questions, please feel free to just respond or just ask, and of course I'll be able to, I'll put that forward. Another question is coming from Tabot. She says, do you think your use of PhET simulations in Ghana classroom has some prospect with respect to the Ghana national curriculum and the fact that cell phones are prohibited and most institutions are not equipped with, while most teachers are not well yet trained effectively. There are different layers to that. But what's the prospect of PhET teams in Ghana, considering teacher professional development level, access to tools in institutions, and the prohibition of cell phones for students in schools?
Okay. I will say that when you come to Ghana, currently there are even reforms that are ongoing in our senior high school setting. And one of the documents, which is the Education Strategic Plan from 2018 to 2030, recommends that as teachers, we must employ appropriate technology in our lesson delivery. When you look at the current reforms that are ongoing in our senior high school setting, teachers currently have been taken through series of workshops where some of the workshops they are being exposed to how they can integrate technology into their lesson delivery. And so for now, when you come to Ghana, there are even schools currently having smart classrooms where we have laptops in these classrooms for students to have their lessons there. And again, it is in the pipeline, let me say it that way, from the education ministry to even provide all schools with tablets so that all lesson documents may be on these tablets. So although our students are not using mobile phones in the senior high school, alternatives are being provided for teachers to make use of the available technology.
Thanks again, Patrick. Abraham just posted, I didn't join early, but I want to ask, how long did it take for a particular classroom study on PhET to arrive at the conclusion? So how long did you run the research?
So for every session, every week we had 2 hours of meeting. There are some weeks that we had 3 hours, depending on the activities that we want to do. And when you look on this activity sheet, you could see that every activity that the learners are supposed to do is being timed. So for example, the learners opening and exploring the sim would take them some 10 minutes. Then along the line, so every activity that they do and whatever activity they do, they are being asked some questions. So like, for example, from the PhET simulation environment, draw circuit symbols. So after the learner has gone through the activity, based on their observation, we provide a question for them to answer so that by the time the activity is done, whatever objective that we have for the day would have been achieved. And when we finish and we see learners with some little challenges, we also provide room for giving clarifications and why they also gave those kind of conclusions. We give the opportunity to them to also share with us why they have written what they have on their paper, because it's a group work. And so everything that they write is something that the group has agreed on. So we give them time. Most of our activities last for 1 hour. After 1 hour, we close for the day and continue the following day. That is basically what we're doing for a period of 1 month.
Awesome. Thank you. While we wait for additional questions, of course, lots of thank you, great presentation coming through. I would want to ask a question, or just would like that you shed a bit more light around the engagement theory. I think it can be a powerful tool for teachers to serve as a framework, either in the design or even managing their classroom. You mentioned 3 things around relate, create, and donate. In facilitating a classroom where students are highly motivated, for teachers to integrate the engagement theory or adapt that for their context, what do they need to consider?
Good. So when you look at the 3 components that basically come together to give us the engagement theory, The engagement theory is basically talking about how we can meaningfully engage our learners. So with meaningful engagement, one way of meaningfully engaging our learners is when our learners become active participants of the classroom situation. When you're in the classroom and your learners become passive observers, they will finish, and when a question is being asked outside the classroom, a student will be like, that's what the teacher said, or that's what sir said in the classroom. But when they become active participants, there are times they even reference themselves that, oh, but we saw this when we're doing this particular activity. So the engagement theory is helping the teacher to know that if you want to create a meaningful classroom atmosphere, then put your learners into groups. And with groups, you can put your learners into mixed ability groups. That is when you have an idea about the learners' ability levels. You can even put your learners into mixed gender groups. All these are things that the teacher can do to enhance or bring about meaningful engagement. And also, sometimes you have to relate the concept that you are teaching to the real life application. So when the learners get to know that this concept that is being learned, this is how we can apply it in the real life situation. This also brings about meaningful engagement because they become curious to find out more. And the donate is sharing ideas. So in the donate, you make the learner becomes an active participant. The learner feels that his or her contributions are going to be valued. And so whatever contribution that the learner has, he feels free to share his or her ideas with you. So the engagement theory is basically helping the teacher to create a classroom situation where the learners now feel part of the class. They feel that they are part of every activity that is happening in the classroom.
Awesome, thank you. More questions are coming in. I'll ask my question once we get to that. But I like the next question. And Kalutwa is asking, is the activity sheet Patrick used in his research on the PhET website under resources? So I'll put you on the spot and have you answer yourself.
No, this, for activity sheets, you must design it based on your learner's needs and what you want to achieve. So although under resources, I think you will get some materials that will guide you. But since we are in different contexts, what may work in your context may not necessarily work in my context. So this was designed by myself and my other researchers. We designed this for our study.
Awesome. So I have a response to that, Patrick. And I'm also going to take the moment to also, I would call it an announcement. If you have not explored the resources corner or the activities corner of the website, then you're missing out on a lot. So I'm going to follow up with Patrick and get approval and get the resource uploaded. So if that's the first time you get a chance, everyone to explore and see that, I would say the features are amazing. It was newly designed based on feedback we've collected in recent times. So you want to try that. You can save your favorite activities. You can pick activities just like Patrick has designed and adapt for your use. So even though the contexts are different, of course, the objectives are not too far from each other. So yes, the contexts are different, but you're able to upload, of course, label appropriately that this was designed for this grade level, for this duration, for the Ghana context, and these were the objectives. And teachers with those information will get to understand how they can adapt and use. They can, of course, because PhET is also being distributed as an open educational resource, they are free to use as, of course, once you agree to share. I also need, of course, we'll need your approval, or as long as you consent to put it out there, they can use, but they can also use that as some form of motivation in designing their own activities. So if you're not exploring that part of the website, you're only exploring about 10% of the website. There's a whole lot more that you need to explore. So I invite you to visit the site, check out that new part of the website, and I look forward to hearing your feedback from learning. So I'll follow up with Patrick, or perhaps Patrick, let me ask, do you agree to put in your activity sheet on the PhET website?
Yes, I'll share that with you.
Okay, no, we'll work together to put it out because I'll need you to understand how that works as well.
Okay.
Thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot. and I'm accepting to, to put the activity sheet on the website. Um, so Kaluta says yes, when can we receive the PhET resources for use? Yes, please visit the website, just like I mentioned at inception as well. Please consider joining the community on Facebook as well, where these interactions such as this and requests can definitely be posted. And myself and colleagues, as well as other super users of PhET on the continent, will be happy to respond and guide and answer to the questions you might have. A few more questions, and I'm sure we still have some time to address all of them. Did you prioritize inclusiveness and large class size in your study?
Yes, so that's why I mentioned that in the groups, since the students, we do not have much idea about their abilities, we made use of the mixed gender group so that at least in every group, it is not only males. And fortunately for us, in every class, there were quite a number of females in the class, and so they were mixed up in the group. So we prioritized inclusivity in that direction. I think there was also another part of the question. Large classes.
Yeah, that's
when you look at
large
the
classes.
sample sizes that we made use of, we had one class having 32 students and the other class having 31, which I think is not large enough. So I think subsequent research works can now look at how the PhET can be used when we have very large large class sizes.
Awesome. Two more questions, and yeah, we'll start winding down the session. How did you handle the effect of teacher pedagogical skill? Was the teacher in class A more experienced and skilled than the one in class B? Because here you compared two approaches, maybe assuming that teacher input was constant or the same in both.
It was the same teacher who taught the two classroom situations. You know, there are two different schools. And so you visit school A today, then the next day you visit school B. So it was the same teacher who is well versed in the use of technology in teaching, because we wanted to deal away with differences in pedagogical approaches since we have two different classroom situations. So it was the same teacher who handled the two classroom situations.
Awesome. Two more. Taiwo, did you consider different environments in your research? I think you already responded. Did you consider different environments in your research?
Where I think environment should be well explained here, because when you look at the two classroom situations, they're already two classroom, different environments already. So
different environments and context, yes. So Taiwo is asking, good presentation, well done. The research clearly shows the need for PhET simulation in curriculum development. Okay, so this is just a remark. If there are no more questions, I think we'll start winding down. But just before then, I actually caught myself doing contrary to what Patrick did today, as in explained today. It's even beyond what Patrick, I should not be talking about the PhET website without actually demonstrating, which Patrick has shown is an effective way to show how things work. So I'm just going to take a moment to show you the resource section of the website quickly in the next minute. And this is coming up in a moment. So please don't be like Shola. When you're teaching, demonstrate and actively involve your students, just like we learned from Patrick today. Sorry, just a second. But while I'm coming up with this, Patrick, final words from you. Is there, of course, based on the questions, what are your final words, remark, and what's the biggest thing you want everyone to remember when they're trying to motivate students to learn physics across the continent?
So my final words are that when you want to design activities for your learners, the initial stage, it's not going to be easy. So you will have to try and see how best it works because you are the one going to implement it. And so whatever sim that you want to use to teach a concept, the best thing you can do as an educator is to explore them yourself, design the activity, try practicing the activity. So you do a kind of a learner orientation or student orientation where you put yourself in the shoes of the learner to try and find out if the learner is the one using it, are these things going to work for him or her? And there are times we will also talk about or complain about resource inadequacy. But I think that the little resource that you have, there are times I have used PhET even on my mobile phone to show some of the concepts. So the resources that we have at our disposal, we can also make use of it to, teach the concept. When you look at one of the responses the students gave, the student was like, I wish we had more lessons with the PhET. So you could see that for such a student, if most of the lessons that are more abstract are being taught using the PhET interactive simulation, he or she is really going to enjoy the class. And not only that particular student, but the whole student body, they are going to enjoy the class, and always they will be running to call you whenever your period or your time is up for you to come and teach, but you are nowhere to be found. Thank you very much, Shola. Hello. Hello. Oh, okay. So I think my Shola has dropped. So let me attend to these questions. Let me attend to these questions.
Hi, Patrick. Do you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you now. It seems you dropped.
Yeah, sorry. I think I lost, I got pushed out a bit, but I'm glad to be back.
Okay.
Thanks again for everyone for joining. Unfortunately, there's a technical glitch now, and I would not be able to demonstrate the activities part of and resource section of the PhET website. So please, I encourage that you visit the site and then feel free to come back with questions you might have. Thank you, Rebecca, for stepping in.
Yeah, no worries.
So without additional questions, I think we'll draw the curtain today. Thanks again for joining today's edition of the session. Remember, next month, we're going to meet a week earlier so that we give you enough time to enjoy the end to the year. So we'll meet on the 11th of December, the second Wednesday, not the third Wednesday as we typically meet. So see you next month. It was great to have you. Thanks again, Patrick, for joining. Bye for now, everyone. Thanks, Patrick.
All right. Bye.